In an age where institutions that seemed immovable now tremble under the weight of internal corruption and external disruption, where leaders falter under scrutiny, and where public trust seems like a relic of the past, questions of power, its use, misuse, and fragility are more urgent than ever. Governments are toppled overnight, social movements shift the tides of public opinion in a single tweet, and even the wealthiest corporations find their dominance threatened by forces they underestimated. Amid this swirling uncertainty, the cry for clarity and truth grows louder. What makes power endure? Why do some structures collapse so quickly while others seem to stand against all odds? The teachings of Jesus Christ offer profound insights into these modern dilemmas, presenting not just critiques of worldly power, but a vision of its true nature. His words challenge the very foundations of how power is defined, exercised, and sustained. He called out the hypocrisy of leaders, the fleeting allure of wealth, and the emptiness of human praise, offering instead a blueprint for resilience and enduring influence. As we explore the structural, social, and personal fragilities of power, we find that Jesus' wisdom not only diagnoses the cracks in today's systems, but also points to solutions that are as transformative as they are timeless. What happens when institutions lose their moral foundation? How does public perception shape the rise and fall of leaders? Why is it that even the strongest individuals crumble under the weight of their own weaknesses? When we reflect on the structural fragility of power, it becomes clear that even the most imposing worldly structures reveal their vulnerability when not built on God's eternal truth. Jesus emphasized again and again that any true and lasting power must be founded upon God Himself. Institutions may depend on laws, policies, and human systems for legitimacy, but the Lord warned against relying on these alone when He compared one who disregards His words to a foolish man who built his house on the sand, Matthew 7:26. The moment integrity is lost, whether through corruption or the erosion of accountability, institutions begin to falter. Christ condemned the Pharisees for polishing the external show of purity but neglecting righteousness of heart, proclaiming, "Woe to you! You clean the outside of the cup, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence." Matthew 23:25. No matter how well fortified, any system without genuine godliness at its core is susceptible to collapse. Worldly power also hinges on the control of material resources such as wealth or military might, yet these too are subject to decay. The Lord's warning, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy," Matthew 6:19. reveals the transient nature of these earthly assets. Overdependence on them eventually leads to a downfall, just as in the parable of the rich man who tore down his barns to build bigger ones, only to discover that his life would be required of him that very night. Luke 12:16-21. Even the most carefully managed empires can see their power crumble when they place their hope in temporary riches rather than in God. Leaders may attempt to secure themselves by establishing chains of command, yet the worldly reliance on intermediaries can expose the fragility of power. Disloyalty, negligence, or incompetence will quickly undermine authority. Jesus instead demonstrated the power of servant leadership, declaring, "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant," Mark 10:43. Contrary to the coercive approaches of the world, Christ delegated authority to his disciples through love and unity. He cautioned them that a house divided against itself cannot stand, Mark 3:25. Where trust is broken and unity is absent, leadership soon falters under the weight of its own divided structure. Considering the social fragility of power, one realizes how precariously it often rests on the shifting sands of public perception, alliances, and narrative control. Jesus taught that placing one's confidence in human approval is an insecure foundation, admonishing his disciples with, "Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you," Luke 6:26. It is no surprise then that the very crowds who shouted Hosanna eventually turned to cry, "Crucify him," Matthew 21:9, 27-22. Human acclaim is easily swayed, revealing that what appears stable at one moment can be lost the next. Alliances too appear powerful on the surface, yet they can fracture under conflicting agendas. Jesus warned against forging partnerships based on worldly gain alone, and the scriptures remind believers do not be yoked together with unbelievers. 2 Corinthians 6:14. The alliance between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, otherwise rivals, was a temporary truce founded on their shared opposition to Jesus, and it inevitably turned destructive. Matthew 22:15-22. Without a foundation in shared obedience to God, such relationships will inevitably crack. It is through narrative control that many leaders try to maintain power. Yet earthly narratives can be undermined by truth. Jesus declared, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. While the powers of his day tried to suppress his message with false accusations, the truth of the resurrection shattered their control. Matthew 28:11-15. False narratives may linger for a time, but they ultimately collapse under the weight of divine truth. Turning to the personal or psychological fragility of power, one sees how easily human leadership can be undermined from within. Charisma, intelligence, or ambition may carry a leader for a season, but Jesus plainly taught the limits of unaided human strength. "Apart from me, you can do nothing," John 15:5. A leader's character flaws, be they impulsiveness, fear, or a thirst for approval, can sabotage the very authority that depends on that leader's moral rectitude. Peter's brash confidence crumbled when he denied Christ. Yet the same man was transformed into a bold proclaimer of the gospel through the power of the Holy Spirit. Matthew 26:33-34, Acts 2:14. Without reliance on God, even the strongest will fail in moments of great test. There is also the matter of stress and isolation. Positions of authority often isolate leaders, making them vulnerable to exhaustion or misguided decisions. Jesus demonstrated a better way, frequently withdrawing to pray and draw strength from the Father, Luke 5:16. Far from embracing solitude as a refuge from community, he gathered disciples around him, teaching them to bear one another's burdens. In stark contrast, Judas allowed himself to be cut off by guilt and despair, with tragic consequences. Matthew 27:3-5. Succession and continuity are likewise sources of fragility. Where worldly leaders cling to power or fail to plan for a successor, their sudden absence can throw entire systems into turmoil. Jesus, however, prepared his disciples for his departure, entrusting them with the Great Commission, saying, "Go and make disciples of all nations." Matthew 28:19. Rather than leaving them leaderless, he promised the guidance and comfort of the Holy Spirit, John 16:7. Because he placed his cause in hands nurtured through divine wisdom, the mission endured beyond his earthly life. In considering the amplifiers of these fragile dynamics, Jesus made it plain that external crises, such as wars, persecutions, or disasters, would test the faith of his followers. He reminded them that nation will rise against nation, yet the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Matthew 24:7-13. Worldly power can crumble in the face of such upheavals, but when rooted in God, resilience remains. The Lord also outlined the importance of feedback loops of righteousness, acts of love and compassion that increase spiritual strength and cement unity. "Give, and it will be given to you," he taught, "for with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Luke 6:38. Where love and mercy abound, leaders find their endeavors strengthened. Lastly, Jesus modeled restraint and focus, refusing to overextend his ministry with worldly ambitions, John 18:36. He instead channeled his disciples' energies in ways suited to each one's gifts and calling, avoiding the worldly trap of taking on more than God's purpose intended. The fragility of worldly power stands as a stark reminder of the unshakable strength found in God's kingdom. In a world where leaders rise and fall, where institutions tremble, and where public trust is often fractured, the teachings of Jesus call us to a higher standard. As citizens in a democracy and members of God's kingdom, we bear the responsibility to reflect Christ's principles, not only in our votes and advocacy, but in the way we approach relationships, institutions, and the challenges of our time. Jesus' words remind us that true power is not found in dominance or fleeting alliances, but in justice, mercy, and unwavering reliance on God. If we build our lives and communities on this eternal foundation, we can help shape a society that endures, not by avoiding uncertainty, but by being resilient through it. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, Jesus said, and all these things will be given to you as well. Matthew 6:33. Let us embrace this call, not as an ideal out of reach, but as a tangible way to live boldly, love deeply, and serve faithfully as citizens of both heaven and earth.